November 21st, 2024. 3:17 p.m. Moscow time. Somewhere in the Astrakhan region, southern Russia, a launch pad is activated. A missile rises. There is no immediate roar, just a pillar of fire, and then silence. The projectile tears through the atmosphere at a speed that no civilian nomenclature can adequately describe. Mach 10. 10 times the speed of sound. That is 12,250 kilometers per hour. 1,500 kilometers away, in Dnipro, Ukraine, air raid sirens blare. Radar screens show something the operators know they cannot stop. The available time is approximately 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Not 3 hours, not 3 days. 3 minutes. For an entire city to process a warning, decide, act, survive. And then the missile strikes. Minutes later, Vladimir Putin appeared live on national television. He named the missile, he described its capabilities, and he told the world without hesitation that it was impossible to intercept. Right now, as you watch this video, NATO military planners are sitting in front of a problem for which there is no ready answer. Because what Russia did that day wasn't just firing a new weapon. It was announcing to the whole world, live on national broadcast, that the rules of the European strategic chessboard had just been rewritten. There is a question that Pentagon analysts have been asking in silence since November 2024, and which, in recent months, has become truly urgent. How do you defend a continent when the response time is shorter than the time it takes to reach a shelter? This is not a rhetorical question. It's not a theoretical classroom exercise. It is the raw arithmetic of what happened over the skies of Dnipro, and what that arithmetic means for every European capital within a 1,000-kilometer radius of Russian launch positions. I am going to guide you, piece by piece, missile by missile, layer by layer, through exactly how this system works, why it cannot be intercepted with the tools NATO has today, and what this means for the security architecture that has sustained Europe since 1991. Stay until the end, because there is a specific moment in this video, a revelation that will change how you understand everything that comes before it. And this revelation is not about a missile. It's about the collapse of a premise. Let's begin. You've heard the name Oreshnik before today. You've probably read a headline or two. Russia launches hypersonic missile at Ukraine. And the immediate assumption, the one almost everyone made, is predictable. Russia has another fast missile. Impressive, perhaps, but not necessarily a strategic breakthrough. That assumption is wrong. And the kind of wrong that matters most is this one. The kind that seems reasonable until the consequences arrive. Follow the numbers, not the headlines. Because speed, Mach 10, Mach 12, whatever number you prefer, is not the variable that changed the European strategic calculus. Speed is impressive. Speed is threatening. But speed alone doesn't break a defense system. What breaks a defense system is interceptability, or in this case, the lack thereof. The real question isn't, how fast does the Oreshnik fly? The real question is there anything anywhere in the NATO arsenal today that can destroy it before impact? Hold on to that question. The answer, the complete answer, with the numbers, with the geometry, with what happens when you try to intercept an object at Mach 10 that still changes its trajectory in the second before it lands, that answer comes later. And when it does, you will understand why the Pentagon isn't worried about a specific missile. It's worried about the collapse of a premise that took decades to build. It's not a question of hardware, it's a question of architecture. And the architecture that Europe has used as a security guarantee for over 30 years has just revealed a flaw that no one knows how to fix within any politically acceptable time frame. But before we get to what it breaks, we need to understand what the Oreshnik really is. Not what the headlines say. What it is, technically, categorically, and why that distinction matters in ways no headline explains. This is not the Kinzhal with a fresh coat of paint. Understand that before continuing. The Kinzhal you already know or should. Since March 2022, when Russia first used it in Ukraine, it has become the symbol of the Russian hypersonic program. It is air-launched from a MiG-31, reaches Mach 10, a range of about 2,000 kilometers, and under certain circumstances in Ukraine in 2023, the Patriot Pass 3 actually managed to shoot it down because the Kinjal, despite its speed, follows a relatively calculable trajectory. Fast, but calculable. The Oreshnik is in another category. The difference isn't one of degree, it's one of class. Classified as an IRBM intermediate-range ballistic missile. The Oreshnik is part of a family designated 9M730. And here begins the first distinction you need to commit to memory. It is not an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. This difference is not semantic. It is deliberate and calculated. Because ICBMs are regulated by arms control treaties, IRBMs are not. By positioning the Oreshnik as an IRBM, Russia operates in a legal and strategic zone that current arms control frameworks simply do not cover. In the world of intelligence, they call this a regulatory loophole, and Russia found it with surgical precision. Now, what makes the Oreshnik fundamentally different from any previous system lies in its warhead. MARV, Maneuvering Re-Entry Vehicle. This isn't just technical jargon without practical consequence. It's the reason why the Oreshnik cannot be intercepted by the systems currently available in the West. And once you understand this mechanism, you'll realize why the Oreshnik isn't just a faster weapon. It's a weapon that breaks the logic of any existing kinetic interceptor. Think of it like a precise mechanical sequence. A kinetic interceptor, which is what THAAD and the Patriot PAC-3 use, works by calculating where the enemy projectile will be at a future moment and positioning its own projectile at that exact point. It's geometry, it's collision arithmetic, and it works as long as the target is predictable. Now imagine that, in the final second of descent, at Mach 10, the target changes direction. The interception solution calculated over the last 2 minutes becomes useless the instant the maneuver happens. The interceptor passes through the space where the Oreshnik was supposed to be, and the Oreshnik lands where no system had even aimed yet. This is interceptability in terms of hypersonic geometry. It's not a lack of technology. It's physics, the absolute limit of what any kinetic interceptor can do when the target has the freedom to maneuver in its terminal phase. The Oreshnik's flight profile combines both ballistic and glide elements. In practical terms, this means it doesn't follow the clean arc that early warning radar systems were designed to track. There's a period during its flight, a transition between the ballistic phase and the terminal phase, where it sits in a radar dead zone, too low for long-range strategic warning systems, yet still too high for terminal defense radars. A blind spot, and Russia exploited it. The Oreshnik can also be configured with conventional or nuclear warheads. This optionality is not a minor detail. It's the core of what strategists call an instrument of subnuclear coercion. Russia can threaten with it and use it without crossing the nuclear threshold, which means NATO cannot respond with nuclear assets, and it doesn't have the conventional assets capable of intercepting it. Remember this dynamic well. It will be crucial in the most important part of this video. Now compare it with the Zircon sea-launched Hypersonic cruise profile, range of about 1,000 kilometers. Threatening, but trackable. A previous generation threat. The Oreshnik isn't an upgrade, it's a new category. And the first question Western analysts asked when the strike data came in was, how many of these does Russia have? How many are in production? The answer remains open for now. But what matters most to understand first is the event that brought this system to the world's attention, and why this event was deliberately designed to be seen. At this point, the story takes a turn that will show you that the weapon itself is only half of what happened that day. November 21st, 2024. The trajectory is confirmed, from the Astrakhan region to Dnipro, approximately 1,500 kilometers. Total flight time, about 15 minutes. 15 minutes. For a missile to cover a distance equivalent to crossing half a continent. But the number that matters isn't 15. It's 3. Because it was approximately 3 minutes before impact that Ukrainian defenses, already overwhelmed, already exhausted after 2 years of continuous bombardment, received the warning they could do absolutely nothing about. Consider the choice of target. Dnipro isn't a frontline city. It's not in the immediate combat corridor. It's an industrial city with over 1 million inhabitants, far enough east to carry symbolic significance, far enough from the west to minimize the risk of immediate escalation, and visible enough in European media to guarantee massive coverage the very next day. Russia didn't have to fire the Oreshnik at Dnipro. It chose to. And then Putin went on national television, live, on camera. He publicly named the missile. He described its capabilities. He stated in direct language and without diplomatic euphemisms that the Oreshnik was impossible to intercept with any existing defense system. It wasn't a leak. It wasn't speculation. It was the Russian president on television naming a weapon he had just used and explaining to the world why no one could have stopped it. In defense jargon, this is classified as a strategic demonstration with deliberate public signaling. You don't expose an operational capability to the enemy unless you want them to know you have it. The exposure is the message. The missile was the vehicle. The real audience wasn't Dnipro. It was NATO. The context matters here. In the weeks prior to the strike, the United States authorized Ukraine to use American-supplied long-range missiles to strike Russian territory. It was a significant escalation in the conflict. And Russia responded, not with words, not with a diplomatic note, but with a strike from a weapon no one had seen before, followed by a live announcement from the president. In the hours that followed, European capitals convened emergency consultations. The Pentagon initiated formal assessments. The first public confirmations arrived in the following weeks. NATO publicly acknowledged that it currently has no capability to intercept the Oreshnik. Listen closely to what this means. NATO has publicly acknowledged that it cannot be intercepted. It wasn't a PR accident. It was the forced admission of a reality that Western military planners had been avoiding saying out loud. And this admission leads us straight to the question I said I would answer with numbers and exact geometry. It's time for some arithmetic. Let's break down the math, because this is where this video reaches its most critical point. And the math does not favor NATO. Start with THAAD Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. It's the highest altitude American anti-missile defense system, designed to intercept ballistic missiles in their terminal descent phase, either outside or in the upper atmosphere. In terms of conventional capability available in the West, it's the ceiling. It's the best there is. And you need to understand exactly why it doesn't work here, because this is the core of the structural problem. THAAD calculates where the enemy projectile will be at the moment of interception, positions its interceptor at that exact spot, and waits for the kinetic collision. The decision cycle from the tracking radar to firing the interceptor takes mere seconds. Under normal operating conditions, against a conventional ballistic missile with a stable trajectory, it works. The trajectory is calculable. The interception point can be determined. At Mach 10, the closing rate between the interceptor and the target is so high that any trajectory deviation in the final second, any MARV maneuver, renders the previous interception calculation mathematically useless. The interceptor was designed to meet an object where it's supposed to be, and the Oreshnik is not where it's supposed to be. Imagine the following combat analogy. You train for 3 years to block a straight punch. Your opponent, in the very last inch before contact, turns that straight punch into a hook. All your previous training becomes irrelevant in that instant. Not because you're slow, but because the problem changed when it was already too late to adapt. That is saturation by unpredictability, and no existing kinetic system can solve it. Let's move on to the Patriot PAC-3. You already understand the limitation. It has shown the ability to shoot down Kinzhals under specific conditions in Ukraine. But the Kinzhal does not maneuver in its terminal phase. And the Patriot PAC-3 wasn't designed to operate against targets re-entering at Mach 10 with a variable maneuver profile in the final stage. But here is where the problem becomes structural, and not just technical. THAAD interceptor stockpiles are depleted. This isn't a rumor. It's a documented reality based on US congressional assessments. Commitments in the Middle East have consumed reserves that cannot be quickly replaced. The estimated time frame to replenish THAAD interceptor stockpiles is around 2027. Think about that time frame. 2027, 3 years after the Dnipro strike, and the Patriot batteries partially committed to Ukraine, partially to Israel, and partially positioned to contain Taiwan. In a scenario with multiple simultaneous theaters, what exists today doesn't cover all commitments at once. The math on the resources just doesn't add up. There's also the Israeli Arrow 3 system, the highest altitude kinetic interceptor available outside the US, capable of operating in the exoatmospheric layer. It is the absolute ceiling of conventional Western defense. And the Oreshnik, on its Mach 10 re-entry trajectory, descends through this envelope in a fraction of a second, far too fast for the decision cycle to complete within the available physical window. Let's look at the arithmetic of a 3-minute warning in detail. Imagine you are in Warsaw. It's a weekday afternoon. The alarm goes off. You have 3 minutes. The nearest shelter is a 6-minute walk away. That is the calculation every defense system operator faces, and that any civilian within that radius faces as well. The operator must confirm the radar alert, verify it's not a false positive, authorize the launch through the chain of command, compute the updated trajectory, and fire the interceptor before the target changes course for the final time. In controlled tests, under ideal conditions, this entire cycle takes longer than the available window allows. In real-world conditions, with the saturation of multiple simultaneous targets, with electronic warfare noise, with the operational exhaustion of 2 years of continuous conflict, the cycle cannot be completed. The arithmetic just doesn't add up. This isn't military science fiction. It's the conclusion that NATO's own military planners put into documents that the Pentagon has publicly confirmed since November 2024. Let that reality sink in. And that brings us back to the question I posed earlier. If Europe is within range, and interception is not viable, what happens when you draw the real map of what is exposed? This is where this crisis expands beyond Ukraine. Open a map, any map of Europe. Draw a 500-kilometer radius circle from launch positions in Western Russia and Belarusian territory. Inside that circle, a 3-minute warning, you'll find entire Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Warsaw, parts of Romania, areas in eastern Poland that host NATO bases. Within a 1,000-kilometer radius, a 5 to 8-minute warning, Berlin, Prague, Budapest, Bucharest, most of the capitals on the alliance's eastern flank. At 1,500 kilometers, Paris, Rome, parts of the United Kingdom. The declared range of the Oreshnik, depending on the variant and payload, goes from 500 to 5,500 kilometers. That covers practically all of continental Europe. Keep the image of this range zone in mind. This stops being a Ukrainian problem the second you draw it out. That's not analytical exaggeration. It's range arithmetic applied to real-world geography. And here's what makes this more serious than just the numbers. NATO's air defense architecture was built for different threats. The Patriot systems, early warning radars, scramble protocols. They were all designed for subsonic and supersonic threats from the 80s and 90s, not for maneuverable re-entry vehicles at Mach 10 in 2024. For military analysts, the exact term is threat mismatch. You built the shield for yesterday's projectile, and yesterday has arrived. Eastern flank members, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, are the most geographically exposed, and they are exactly the ones with the least defense infrastructure capable of covering the hypersonic window. Poland is receiving THAAD systems, but the delivery is staggered. Stockpiles are limited by the problems you already know about, and the capability to cover multiple vectors simultaneously does not yet exist. Western members, France, Germany, the UK, have a greater geographical distance, which buys a few extra minutes of warning. But the same structural restrictions on interceptability apply. Extra minutes of warning don't solve what physics doesn't allow. Consider the implications of this. In 2025, Russia escalated its signaling. Statements from Russian officials explicitly began mentioning categories of European infrastructure as potential targets if the flow of Western weapons to Ukraine continues. Power grids, logistics hubs, railway networks serving as supply lines. Operational categories. Named, with the Oreshnik as a credible delivery vehicle. There is an open question raised by this geographical exposure. If Europe is within the window and cannot intercept, why hasn't NATO responded with a capable counter-deployment? Here is where the story turns, because the problem isn't just physical. The interceptability problem would be serious enough on its own, but NATO's response is constrained by 3 forces that have nothing to do with physics. The first is the math of multiple commitments. The United States is simultaneously the security guarantor of NATO in Europe, the containment actor for Taiwan in the Pacific, and committed to Israel's defense and the containment of the Iranian ballistic program in the Middle East. Three theaters, competing for the same resources, the same THAAD interceptors, the same Patriot batteries, the same industrial production capacity. A counter-deployment in Europe matching the Oreshnik's capability class would require resources that, right now, are already allocated elsewhere. The second force is the arms control vacuum. The INF Treaty, which eliminated ground-based intermediate-range missiles from Europe, was abandoned by Russia in 2019. The direct consequence: NATO has no ground-based missile system deployed in Europe that matches the Oreshnik's class, and any counter-deployment proposal deploying American medium-range missiles on European soil for the first time since the 80s is a political act of enormous magnitude. No NATO member has publicly proposed this with a concrete plan and timeline. The third force is the domestic political ceiling. The 2024 elections produced governments with smaller margins for escalation. The US Congress hasn't approved significant expansions of funding for European defense on the required scale. Several NATO members still fall below the 2% GDP target for defense spending, and the political pressure to increase this spending competes directly with urgent domestic priorities in each member state. And Article 5 exists. But Article 5 is a collective guarantee that requires collective political will to be activated. The definition of what level of Oreshnik use: a demonstrative strike, a second strike, an attack on civilian infrastructure, would trigger a collective response, has not yet been publicly resolved in any NATO council. It's not an accidental omission. It is the hardest problem to answer in an alliance of 32 countries with 32 parliaments. Translate this into operational reality. Combine the three factors: committed resources, arms vacuum, political ceiling, and the result isn't total paralysis. It's an alliance that can do many things, but cannot do the one thing that would solve the core problem. And the core problem isn't a missile. It's what that missile represents for a structure that took decades to build. Pay attention to what was really broken, because this is where the video gets to the revelation I promised at the beginning. The truth is worse than the silence. Russia doesn't need to fire the Oreshnik again. The deterrence architecture is already broken, because Europe now knows it cannot be stopped. Pay attention to that statement. Absorb its weight. The structure that has maintained European peace since 1991, formally called extended deterrence, rested on two simultaneous premises. The first: any Russian ballistic missile threatening Europe would provide enough warning time to trigger a response escalating the crisis, mobilizing allies, activating defense protocols, making a first strike calculatedly too risky. The second: American anti-missile systems could intercept a limited attack, making the threat of a direct strike against European infrastructure not just politically dangerous, but militarily unfeasible. Oreshnik invalidated both premises, at the same time, in a single event, in 15 minutes. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. It's not the delusion of a pessimistic analyst. It was a live event, over a real city, with Putin on television publicly naming the system, and NATO confirming its inability to respond in the following weeks. And when you understand the mechanism this created, you'll understand why Oreshnik isn't a weapon. It's a strategic condition. In strategic doctrine, this mechanism has a specific name: an instrument of subnuclear coercion. It means the following. Russia can threaten and attack European infrastructure with conventional warheads without crossing the nuclear threshold, using a system that NATO cannot intercept and that doesn't automatically trigger the American nuclear response umbrella. Because a nuclear response isn't triggered by a conventional attack, even if the vehicle is hypersonic, even if the damage is catastrophic. This creates a gap that Western strategists have spent decades trying to close. A zone where Russia can apply coercive pressure, damage critical infrastructure, and force political decisions, all while remaining below the threshold that would trigger the alliance's maximum reaction. The mechanism that demolished extended deterrence isn't the warhead. It's the 3-minute window. Because 3 minutes isn't time to decide. It's time to realize the decision has already been made by someone else. This transforms Oreshnik from a weapon into a strategic condition. And strategic conditions aren't resolved by disarming a single missile. They're resolved by rebuilding the premise of deterrence. or accepting that the premise has fundamentally changed and adapting behavior accordingly. Go back to the question this video started with. How do you defend a continent when the response time is less than the time it takes to reach a shelter? For now, the honest answer is, you don't defend it. You recalculate. And the recalculation is happening, in Moscow, in Washington, in Brussels, with different conclusions and different urgencies. But Oreshnik didn't appear out of nowhere. There's an arms race that produced it. And this race doesn't just have two participants. Russia didn't invent hypersonic missiles in a vacuum. The hypersonic arms race has been underway for over a decade, and the United States isn't winning. Look at the timeline. The Kinzhal, air-launched, Mach 10, 2,000 kilometers of range, declared operational in 2018. First combat use, March 2022, Ukraine. The Zircon, sea-launched hypersonic cruise profile, declared operational in 2022. And Oreshnik, the new category, the maneuverable re-entry system with a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometers. Combat debut, November 2024. This is a development cadence that American defense planners haven't replicated. American hypersonic programs, the HGV, Hypersonic Glide Vehicle, and the LRHW, Long-Range Hypersonic Weapon, have suffered from testing delays, budgetary timeline issues, and still lack operationally deployed equivalents in Oreshnik's class. It's not a matter of American technological capability. It's a matter of budget cycles, procurement priorities, and legacy. The restrictions of the INF Treaty, even after its demise in 2019, left a generation of planners out of the habit of developing ground-based medium-range missiles. The gap isn't just in hardware, it's in planning culture. But here the story expands beyond Europe. China has the DF-17, a hypersonic glide vehicle mounted on an IRBM, operational since approximately 2019, and the DF-ZF, with an even longer range. These systems are deployed with a primary focus on the Indo-Pacific in the context of the Taiwan Strait, and they add pressure on the very same American resources that should be responding to the European problem. What this creates is a multi-theater problem that American resources simply weren't scaled to cover simultaneously with maximum effectiveness. The hypersonic gap isn't just European. It's structurally systemic, and every theater that triggers it consumes capacity that the others need. Closing this gap after Russia has already established an operational precedent of use is a radically different equation than having closed it beforehand. Time is the scarcest resource in this race, and the clock started on November 21, 2024. In light of everything we've seen, the central question remains unrelenting. How do you protect millions of people when the impact arrives before the alarm even finishes ringing? As of right now, this question has no operational answer. What exists is a window, narrow, but still open, to rebuild the premise of deterrence. What indicators should we watch for in the coming weeks and months? First, THAAD deployments in Eastern Europe. If the United States moves additional batteries to Poland or the Baltic states, above what is already committed and scheduled, it signals that the Pentagon has abandoned its reactive posture and is in a preemptive repositioning mode. This is different from what exists today. Second, any discussion about a successor treaty to the INF. If Washington and Moscow, or Washington and Beijing, sit down at the table regarding intermediate-range missile limitations, it indicates that the parties have calculated that the race isn't heading anywhere good for either side. The absence of these talks is equally informative. It means neither party believes an agreement is possible or advantageous on the current horizon. Third, the second use of the Oreshnik. The first strike was a demonstration of capability. A second strike, depending on the target and the political context, is something else entirely. It is the validation of routine operational use, not exceptional signaling. Fourth, full-scale European defense procurement decisions. If Eastern flank countries start contracting next-generation systems in significant numbers, and more importantly, if the US Congress approves funding for it, the strategic calculus is shifting faster than public statements acknowledge. This story isn't anywhere near the end. It's at the beginning of the second act. Stay tuned. Stay informed. If you want to keep following this analysis as events unfold, subscribe to the channel, because the next indicators will arrive quickly, and when they do, you'll want to already have the context this video gave you. Because what happens with this window will determine how European security works, or stops working, for an entire generation.